all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. And finally, PuroClean. PuroClean is the paramedics of property damage. It provides water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold removal, biohazard cleanup. It also has a focus on veteran franchisees. You can learn more about them by going to puroclean.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including rss.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcast. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. We want to give you a little advance notice. We're going to have a Veterans Radio event on Sunday, September 28th, 2025. Radio on the River. We're doing a new location on Freedom River in Livingston County, Michigan. We want you to save the date. We're going to have veteran storytelling and guest speakers. We'll have raffle items, great local musicians and food. Also, uniquely, there's going to be an opportunity to fly in a UH-1 Huey from the Michigan Flight Museum. And maybe you can also win a free ride that way. But plan on supporting Veterans Radio either by buying tickets or sponsoring Radio on the River. Contact us at dale@veteransradio.org or jim@veteransradio.org to get more information, but we'd love to have you come out, and we'd certainly love to have you sponsor. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today an author, Debbie Maulding, who has written The Angels of Bataan and Corregidor, A Legacy of Honor, Duty, and Compassion. Debbie, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you, Jim. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, it's an interesting story that you write about, and it's about the nurses who were on Bataan and Corregidor who were prisoners of war in World War II. And I suspect there are people listening, maybe young folk, who go, oh, nurses are POWs as well, so we'll get into that as well. But you've been writing in the military history for a few years now. You've participated in the Beyond Belief True Stories series that our mutual friend Doug Sterner has a bunch of people writing on. How did you decide, you know what, I'm going to write a book on the Angels of Bataan and Corregidor?
Well, you mentioned Doug Sterner. He actually encouraged me to do it. He is currently, or has recently, published a book about women in the military, women heroes. And I had done a shorter version of the same story for his book. And when he got it, he said, you should turn this into a book. So I said, well, maybe, I don't know. He said, no, there's no maybe, you need to do it. And he started immediately sending me instructions of how to do it. So that can be rather persuasive. And I love the story. So put those two things together, and within a couple of weeks, the book was on its way. So.
Well, it's a great contribution to, as I say, military history, which you write in, but you've been writing really your whole life. You are a retired registered nurse, so I know this series of this story and these 11 nurses you write on kind of, that's right in your sweet spot. It
Exactly.
must have been a little bit of motivation for you to say, I'm writing about nursing history here.
Right. That's why originally when Doug posted the list of stories that he would like to have for his book, when I saw 11 nurses that were POWs, first of all, I'd never heard the story. I had no idea. And so I picked that one right away and started on it, and I was just amazed. There were so many things that I had heard in the past, but I never knew the actual history behind it. So it was really interesting.
Well, why don't you give us a little bit of information on the Navy Nurse Corps? I think a lot of people would maybe make certain assumptions that aren't true. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came about and the service in World War II?
Okay. Well, actually, people don't realize that there was no Navy Nurse Corps until President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, signed it into action, and that was like 1908. And there have been, of course, corpsmen or servicemen who provided emergency treatment and care, that kind of thing. And even as far back as the Civil War, there were nurses around, but there was not an organized nurse corps with a leader and standards of practice. And so it was quite a story to find out, as even for me, because I had thought about being in the Navy Nurse Corps at one time, and I didn't realize it was strictly from the 1900s,
And again, before that, nurses showed up through different organizations. Maybe it was the YWCA, maybe it was the American Red Cross,
Right.
maybe it was the Salvation Army. Lots of different places would show up on the battlefield and help out in the medical field, both doctors and nurses. So it is kind of interesting that it took into the 1900s before we said, yeah, you know what, we got to have our own nurse corps here.
Right. And when they first came about, they didn't have rank or the same pay or privileges that other military professionals had. So they had a long haul ahead of them to get all of, I guess, what you would think of as the benefits of being in the military to begin with.
You report in the book, The Angels of Bataan and Corregidor, that in 1945, when the call went out in World War II that, hey, we're going to need nurses, there was something like 11,000 volunteers. That's astounding to me.
Right. When you think about it, it takes about 10 to 20 RNs per shift to handle 100, 120 patients. They're going to have some nurses' aides and maybe, in this case, corpsmen to help with the lifting and turning and all those kinds of things. But we're talking about RNs, and that was a force to come up with 11,000. That truly was amazing to me.
Well, and they got spread all around the world. We're
That's
focusing
right.
here on the Philippines. They get spread around and they get sent to hospitals and clinics and whatnot. And apparently there was a hospital on the Bataan Peninsula.
Yes, it was. And actually, Bataan had been designated as a R&R station, rest and relaxation for the military personnel. So there was a hospital there. It was, pretty full service, but not, I guess you would say, open to the public, or they didn't provide family medical care, any of those kind of things. It was strictly for the servicemen. Maybe they were recuperating from an injury, that kind of thing.
Well, one of the things, again, I think we don't get much history in high school or college for that matter, but right after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked the Philippines and pretty quickly, a matter of months, took the Philippines over entirely. Some folks might recall that made General Douglas MacArthur leave the Philippines with the famous quote, "I'll be back." But a whole bunch of people were left behind as he scooted off to Australia. And some of those folks left behind were these 11 nurses. Tell us about, sort of what they were doing and how they became prisoners of war.
Okay. They were working throughout the hospital. They weren't like one little bunch of nurses. They were the nurses assigned to different places in the hospital when the attack took place, and the Japanese came into the hospital and rounded up people, patients, nurses, doctors, anybody that was on duty. It was late in the afternoon, I guess, near a shift change. So they at first were allowing them to tend to the patients, get the patients ready to go. And the nurses, of course, as soon as the attack took place, were moving the patients to safer places. And anyway, they took them right away after the patients were all moved, and took the nurses. They took 12 actually prisoner, and one of them was able to escape. So she ended up in Australia actually, and the others were taken to the first encampment, I guess you would call it, was at Santo Tomas.
One of the things that, if you study World War II and the Japanese war in the Pacific, you realize that Japanese moved the folks around the Philippines and even back to plans to move them to POW camps back on the mainland in Japan. So did these nurses get moved around as well?
They did get moved around, but basically in between Bataan and Corregidor, and to different locations there. One of the camps was in an old school, another one was in an old college. And the college happened to have an infirmary, so they had some medical equipment there. Each place that they got moved to, they set up a hospital, and they continued to work the entire time.
And that's sort of one of the amazing things here, is that while they were prisoners of war, they were still meeting their duty, their obligation as nurses to take care of the sick and the injured. I mean, it really is sort of a noble commitment that each of these women made.
That's true. And, as a retired nurse, I can tell you that it is the expectation. Nurses expect that of themselves and of their peers, that whatever situation you're in, you take charge of the people that are in need of care. And that's just the calling of being a nurse. It's part of it. there was one of the ladies, one of the nurses who was very creative and was able to make equipment from items that they found and able to make bandages from old curtains and all kinds of different things that they were able to use in providing care. They even took care of some of the Japanese soldiers that were injured.
How long were they in captivity?
37 months, a little over 3 years.
It's really, hard to believe and think about that. And we, again, know from other stories about Japanese POWs, the conditions in these camps, whether it be how much they had to work, their food, their nutrition, the diseases, the tropical diseases, it all got worse over time, didn't it?
That is correct. It did. And each one of them suffered long-term health issues after they were released. One of them lost from around 160 pounds down to 89 pounds when she was released. That was strictly because of the lack of nutritious food and all of the work that they were doing.
Starvation and disease run through these stories. And honestly,
right.
One of the notes I made after reading the book, The Angels of Bataan and Corregidor, was that it seemed like all of these women died early because of effects from them being POWs. Am I overreading that, or was that kind of what happened to a lot of these women? While they survived being POWs, they had long-term impacts.
That is true. The ones that did live a longer life lived with health issues. They just were able to still survive, Several of them died very young. One of them, tragically, was killed by a drunk driver before she ever made 60 years old. So it's really an interesting story because you expect a lot of huge celebration. Well, there was a celebration when they returned, but not nearly what you would think. A bunch of women were taking POW, but people didn't get all that excited about it. So you have to wonder if the news just didn't travel very fast.
Well, there were so many stories at the time. I'm sure it just got overwhelmed also. But one of the things that struck me as you told these stories is, notwithstanding starvation and disease and their ill health, the medical care that they gave was kind of way beyond what they would do as normal nurses, right? They were doing surgeries. They were delivering babies. Whatever occurred, they had to solve the problem, the medical problem, I suppose.
Pretty much. It was amazing to me throughout the book with each of the nurses. I was able to find out where they trained and what their specialty was. One was an anesthetist, so a nurse anesthetist. So she was able to help keep the patients, when they had medication, medicated during a surgical procedure. Two of them had trained at highly regarded surgical centers during the time period that they would have been in nursing training. So one of them was an obstetrical nurse and went on to be a midwife later. So it was quite a group of women. I mean, they had everything they needed to be full service, I guess you would say. Then yes, at Santo Tomas, they met a doctor, and he was also a prisoner of war, and he encouraged them to take volunteers of other prisoners and train them And from then on, they had a small staff of not just the nurses, but also some assistants and the doctor. And the doctor was able to do more of the complex surgeries, and the nurses were able to do the things, like you said, more complex than you would see nurses doing back in that era.
Oh, certainly, yeah. This forced them beyond their normal bounds, certainly. Well, I'm going to ask you about a couple of these in particular, but one that I wrote this quote down. I said I want to get it out, and I think it was Ellen Page who said, "Not all women wear pearls and sensible shoes. Some wear dog tags and combat boots." And exactly. I really thought that helped sum it up, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And she was quite the character. I was able to find an interview they did with her, and she talked about a lot of different things, but that was my favorite quote from her.
Well, let me ask you about a couple of them here. Tell me about Laura May Cobb.
Oh, she was the leader. I guess you would call her the chief nurse or charge nurse. But she was the leader of the group. She had trained at Wesley Hospital back in 1915. She was around in the nurse corps almost from day one, you know. It started in 1908, and by 1918, she was serving in the Navy Nurse Corps. So she was there with some of the actual founders of that program. And when she heard that there was rumors of war, she volunteered. She said, well, of course I'm going to go. Somebody has to. And she just had the entire nurse mentality, you know.
Yeah, the ethos of we go where the medical treatment's required. Just, you know, one of those stories that, again, kind of it's easy to get lost with all the other stories coming out of World War II and POWs in the Philippines. But another nurse who was with this group of 11 that were prisoners of war with the Japanese was Mary Frances Chapman. Tell us a little bit about her.
She was born in Chicago around 1913. Her dad was a lieutenant in the Spanish-American War. Her mother was a nurse, and she grew up wanting to be like her mom. Her parents had divorced when she was young, or separated. I don't know if they were actually divorced, but she grew up with her grandfather and mom, and in a small town. You know, she decided she was going to be a nurse no matter what. So she traveled to several different nursing programs. By the time she joined the Navy, she was highly trained surgical nurse and very motivated, wanted to be in the military because she wanted to serve. But she also wanted to be a baby nurse. She wanted to take care of babies. So she was kind of torn between which until the war came along. And then she's like, okay, I know where I'm going.
Well, this group, I think I wrote down they delivered 14 babies while they were in captivity with the Japanese for 37 months. So maybe she got her baby fix there. Who knows?
She did get to assist with at least one delivery. I read about that one. So the small town that she grew up in, the paper ran articles frequently about the missing nurses, and you know, they were really behind, you know, find Mary Frances. So it's really a great story about her.
We're talking to Debbie Maulding, who wrote The Angels of Bataan and Corregidor, A Legacy of Honor, Duty, and Compassion. You can find this book on Amazon. Debbie, I think this is of interest to nurses, World War II history buffs, folks who want to know what life really was like in the POW with the Japanese. But when you were writing this, who did you think you were writing it for?
Well, I thought I was writing it for nurses. I really, having been there myself as far as working in hospitals and dialysis centers and all the different types of nursing that I did, I could just, each one of these ladies, I could picture her, what she was going through, everything except being a prisoner. And, we used to complain about, oh, this work is so hard sometimes, or, they treat us like we're prisoners. They treat us like we're slaves, or some kind of stuff like that. You get aggravated with your job and say things sometimes. So, I would think about stuff like that as I was writing it and saying, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's the old we thought. Yeah, that's the old we thought we had it tough. Read these stories, right. You'll really hear what's tough about nursing in the military.
Right.
Well, Debbie Maulding, we really appreciate you taking some time with Veterans Radio today to talk about this book, and we hope nurses will pick it up. Heck, everybody in a nursing school ought to read this so that they can understand what it was like before, and it's what you got going now is not so bad, is it?
That's right. That is so true. Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed getting to talk about it. It's really great.
Well, we're glad to do it, and it's a great read, so thanks for your contribution to this area of medical and military history.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. And PuroClean, a leader in property emergency services. It's the paramedics of property damage, providing water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold and biohazard cleanups. You can reach them at puroclean.com or 800-775-7876. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.